I'm going to show you how to make a specific style of deep, driving, peak time progressive house. I'll be breaking down two of my new tracks, Diatom and Rost, which are available now on Deep Down Music. Link to both streaming and download are in the description below. I'm going to go through each layer of these tracks to show you how I made this and how to get this similar style. So if you're enjoying the content or learning anything, please consider subscribing and liking the video. And the best way to support me is on my Patreon or by purchasing these tracks. Again, links to both of those in the description below. The first track I'm breaking down is called Rost. So I'm at 120 beats per minute and I'm in D minor. Starting with the kick, I wanted something that's going to punch through a very busy mix and something that's a bit deeper. So I've layered up 3 different kicks here just to give it that nice sub, top, and body. Some compression on the low end, and we can move on to the bass. For my bass group, I have some sidechain compression going on with the track spacer, some mid-side EQ taking out the lows of the sides of the image, and then some low-end compression. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of different bass sounds here. So I'm going to go through each individual one. The top is a Serum preset that I made. It's a very subtle little grit, kind of adding a bit of color to the sub. Just fills in a little bit of the empty gaps. So I just made this with a sawtooth and this 4088 wavetable here and just made a pluck sound. Some distortion, delay, reverb. Just a simple sound, but I EQ'd out a lot of the lows and the highs. Some wider to make it wider. Makes sense? And then an arpeggiator on here just to keep it in time and drive on the 16ths. Then I have some sidechain compression and track spacer. So this track spacer is a tool that is used as a sidechain compressor, but it only uses certain frequencies. It's a great tool. Any sounds that are coming in that I sidechain, it will only squish down those specific frequencies. So I'm using this tack, which is the second bass layer. And when this one comes in about halfway through the track, it's actually squishing down the top to make room in the mix. So let's go into the tack sound. And this is a preset inside of Serum. You'll notice I use a lot of presets inside of Serum, Pigments, all the synths that I use, but then I usually alter them to fit the style of the track better. I think it's a great way to experiment with sound design and to push your knowledge of sound design further, being able to use these high quality presets and then adjusting them to your liking. That's a pretty cool sound. I have some hyper, delay, EQ, cutting out the lows and pushing up this bit of resonance. And then this OTT is really making this sound really crispy and punchy, and then some reverb on the channel itself. But yeah, the bread and butter of this is definitely the OTT. So it's just a compressor inside here, and then you turn on the multiband and that turns on the OTT, and I've raised these all up pretty high here. It's slowly opening with the cutoff, and it's slowly opening with the EQ as well to open up more of the high end. And then I have some high compression because it gets pretty sharp in the highs. So I just have this multiband dynamics cutting out the high end. And this is just a really nice layer. It adds a lot of power to the track and just makes it feel very driving. Especially because the track is pretty long. So this opening slowly throughout the whole track just increases that energy as it's gradually building in the entirety of the track. Next, I have my sub frequencies, which I'm using a Serum and using a sawtooth wave so that I get a nice harmonics, and then cutting out a lot of those harmonics. It just makes the bass feel much beefier. Of course, sidechain compression, and then again, track spacer, because I have this pluck, which also has bass. So I'm using that to squish some of the sub so that when the pluck comes through, it's nice and punchy and it punches over top of the sub. This is a nice technique to give your bass a lot of dynamics and a lot of movement because you have multiple bass layers punching and kind of riding over each other without it actually clouding up the mix and making it muddy. So for this pluck here, it's just there to add a bit of groove. Listen with the other instruments. To get this high quality of a bass group like this, there tends to be a lot of layers, and it can get very muddy very quickly, so you have to be careful that you're not adding too many layers that are overlapping without proper EQing or sidechain compression. But sometimes it's easier just to make it a little bit simpler. But the main thing is that the bass is groovy and powerful. You don't want to just keep adding layers to make it more interesting without keeping that groove really strong and having a really good foundation. Another thing to note with the bass is that it's very energetic sounding, and to get that, you have to add a lot of faster notes to your bass lines or to any instrument. The more kind of repetitive and fast your notes are, and the less gaps between the different sounds, usually increases the actual perceived tempo, which makes it feel faster and higher energy. Like if I take off that tack, there's a huge drop in energy. Next up, I have this other pluck, just filling in a lot of the space in between. It's getting a little bit muddy, but I've made sure to really EQ everything and add a lot of sidechain compression from each of the layers. And I have this wub sound. Very subtle, but it just adds this little bit of ear candy that's almost not really able to be heard, but it just adds that little bit, especially when the bass hasn't fully come in yet. It just tricks the ears so that you're kind of listening to something you don't really know where it's coming from. Next up, I have the drums. For these drums, I have 4 different hi-hat layers, probably a little bit too much, to be honest. In these 4 layers, I have this punchy hat, this kind of shakery style hat, which is used to add a bit of swing. So this goes before and after the hat to add a bit of. And then I have this really big splashy ride type of hat. And this is where a lot of the energy comes from. Again, making that bright, high energy, peak time sound by using that ride. So without the ride, it's still aggressive and it punches through and it's still a really nice hat. But that ride just really elevates the energy. And then I have a sidechain compressor that's actually squishing down that ride so that when the kick comes in, it gives it that pushing down motion. So the ride comes in. Very techno influence, but it just creates that nice energy. Next, I have a clap, just a clap, pretty straightforward. For the white perk, it's just a couple different percussions with some heavy EQing on them. Some vocoder. And then that vocoder has an LFO, which is actually adjusting the release time, which is making it sound really cool. Some stereo width. By doing that, it's always giving the ear something fresh and new, and it makes your loop sound really interesting and consistent for a long track. With these repetitive types of tracks, these little ear candies can really help not let the listener get kind of tired or feel like it's repetitive because it's always changing and it's always modulating. Next, I have my shaker. Just a shaker. I'm doing the same thing with the LFO on the release time. Makes it interesting. Another shaker layer here. This one's just to add some swing. Another cool percussion sound. When I'm playing with these percussions, I want to put them in places that are going to encourage the groove and keep that kind of grooving, rolling feeling moving along. Another percussion here. And then some more percussion down here because we want the track to keep growing and being more and more interesting as it's going along. And I like these kind of weird gritty sounds for a really high energy dark track like this. It just adds to the vibe. The group processing, I have just some glue compression. That's basically it for the drums. Up next is the synths, and with the style of harder peak time progressive, usually a really strong drone pad is ideal because it just kind of increases that tension as the track is playing through. And then a lot of atmospheres coming and going to carry the track forward, always keeping it interesting because the main idea of the track is the bass line and that main groove and the harder drums. The lead doesn't come in until much later in the track during the breakdown, so we have to keep that track feeling interesting by adding these things like atmospheres, vocals, different pads, and different sort of lead sounds to keep the track always appealing and moving forward. First, I have this pad sound. Really nice, full, lush sounding pad. We can turn the EQ off. The reverb. Has a little bit of movement on it. This is obtained by adding a bunch of reverb onto a different synth, freezing that reverb, and then recording that audio, and then looping it over and over again. I show this in a ton of my other videos, so you should know by now how to do that. Then I have just another pad, an octave higher. So I believe it's the same pad, just an octave higher, and that just gives a nicer, wider, brighter sound. What I did for this track is I actually automated this brighter pad over the track so that it slowly opens up and just always is increasing energy as it's opening. Just check this out. Just getting louder and louder, making it more and more high energy, increasing that tension. So it just really elevates that whole energy and makes it very peak time of the track when this last drop comes in, opening it up all the way here. Next, I have some other pads here, just one-shot kind of pads. Just recording different pads and place them throughout the track is a really nice idea. So I usually will set up a synth like a Pigments or Serum, and I will record a bunch of different sounds with a lot of reverb on them. And then I will take those different sounds and different melodies that I've recorded with this huge reverb, and I'll place them throughout the track where I think they fit. So let's take a listen to this one. Big reverb on that. And again, just moving the track forward, making it interesting and keeping it sounding very lush and melodic. Some different vocal atmospheres. I have a couple different synths down here. Again, just adding a lot of atmosphere. I'm using this Edgy Squares preset. It's very distorted. This nice reverb. Banger. Then I have some other Pigments down here, just playing some different notes, reverb and delay, different presets or patches that I've made or adjusted without the reverb and delay. Big delay, bigger reverb. Makes these really big atmospheric sounds. This is the lead. I made this in Wavetable. It's just a simple pluck with a little bit of attack on the cutoff, and this makes it a little bit less aggressive when it punches. Nice RP melody. With the attack back down, it's more of a pluck. Makes it a little bit softer, more pleasant to listen to, and not just a stereotypical pluck sound. I had this other layer that I took out, but it's just an octave with some different notes. Thought it sounded cool, but I wasn't sure if I liked it in the final version. Then I have just some basic effects, some impacts to keep it interesting, reverse impacts, big delay with lots of feedback, lots of reverb, different risers and such. Very loud, but then I have just a lot of reverb and delay on that, making this really huge sounding build into the drop. I've mastered the track myself so I can send it out to different DJs for promos, and so I can send it to labels. Let's move on to the next track. Next up, I have the second track of the EP called Diatom. So this one has a similar vibe. It's quite dark, quite heavy, but it's just a little bit different in the actual arrangement of the track. And I wanted to make this so that both tracks in the EP felt like they belonged together, but they were also a little bit different from each other. So let's dive into this project now. So kick, 3 layers. Really nice and punchy sounding kick. Again, to cut through the busy mix. And that's it for the kick. The bass itself, we have some group processing, pulling out some of the lows in the stereo image, some sidechain compression. Again, I have quite a few bass elements. First, I have the top bass. And again, this is just like that top kind of filler in between the bass notes, which is going to make that sub and the overall bass feel full and fast and energetic. It's like that nice rolling. With the sub is a little bit different because the top has faster notes using the arpeggiator, but the sub, nice and groovy and rolling. I've pushed up this higher frequency a lot because the sound itself wasn't really pushing it too much. So I've pushed that up to give it a nice warmth. Without it, you can hear it's kind of lacking. It's a pretty intense EQ. I am clipping a little bit here, but it still sounds okay. Next, I have this really deep low pluck. So I've EQ'd it twice. First with the regular filter and then with the ×4. Some sidechain compression, some regular compression. Really filling up that bass line and adding a lot of notes that are interplaying with each other. So there's notes that are playing and then other ones kind of filling in the gaps in between those other notes, and it makes for really detailed and very professional sounding bass lines. But again, they can get muddy, they can get really messy, so be very careful when you're doing this and make sure you're EQing, you're not overlapping too many notes, and you're using sidechain compression effectively. I have this kind of big sound, some camel crusher, which is a distortion, some track spacer for sidechain compression, and then this pluck that I made, which is like a big release, some flanger, some reverb, giving it that nice tail, and this just accents the bass. Ignore that for now. Then I added these things that I called whip womps, and they are just these really cool, digital, really electric-y sounding. This is from a Bound to Divide bass pack, so I'll put a link to that in the description below as well. But this is a preset pack from Bound to Divide, and it sounds really nice. And then I've added some EQ and some delay and some more EQ to get that nice, like, kind of digital, gritty sound. And this one here is it's the same preset, but I've used Tantra on it. Tantra is a really nice effect plugin. It adds all these different glitch sounds and all these different filters and gates. And it's just hitting once in a while to kind of tease you a little bit, tease your ear, give you some ear candy, and it matches the theme of the track because Diatom is speaking about science on a molecular level, so I just think it kind of goes hand in hand with these like electric, digital, kind of futuristic sounds. And that's everything for the bass. For the drums, I have some glue compression, some sidechain compression from the kick. I usually don't put too much sidechain compression on my drums, but it was just because I have a lot going on in the drums and they were kind of affecting the power of the kick. First, I have my hi-hat, 4 layers, just like the other track, with some heavy EQing, has effect for some width, reverb to make that sound really nice and big. So again, a little bit of a ride in the background, giving it that nice energy. Clap, very straightforward. Shaker, very straightforward. The Afro shaker, very straightforward. Some different percussion sounds. But I wanted to show you specifically this really cool sound that I made. It's using a vocoder and it is playing quite fast and just adding a really nice like swinging. So I use this filter with some resonance and some automation, and moving it up and down, it gives you this really cool back and forth like scraping of this white noise effect. So cool. It's adding a ton of movement and ear candy to the drums. For the synths here, I'm using this lead pluck. It's a Pigments preset. It is a really nice preset that I added this big delay on. Magic Switch, which is a free plugin. Just adds a bit of chorus, and then the MIDI here. So it has that nice sequence inside of the preset, and then that delay just makes it sound really big. I did something different with this track, and I actually made a big drop with only those instruments. You can take a listen right here. Big feedback. The delay keeps ringing out and playing over the drop, which makes it really interesting. Then I have some brighter sounds here. This is, again, another preset inside of Pigments that I've manipulated a little bit, and it's just dropping in pitch and really creating a nice big sound for that build up. For the preset, I just added some pitch dropping on it. This preset is actually just dropping the formant here in the filter, so it's dropping in pitch using the frequency shifter filter. It's a really cool sound, and it just adds a lot of tension when building up that track. Then I have some background leads here, just using different sounds inside of Pigments. This is just really long keys. Again, I probably manipulated it a little bit, but just adding those with a big reverb and delay always tends to usually make these huge atmospheres that really elevate the style of music. Then I have my drone pad, which I talked about in the last track. And I don't need to go over all these effects because it's the same idea of just these big vocal atmospheres, different pad sounds that are coming through, and then of course different effects, impacts, risers, things that are keeping the track interesting and high energy as the track is moving along. So I hope you learned something and I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to check the description. There's a bunch of free stuff. If you want another track breakdown of how to make unique progressive house, check out this video right here, or check out this video right here, which YouTube thinks you'll like based on YouTube's algorithms.